Hey, welcome to the show. I'm joined by my guest, Matthew Bouchard. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So, can you tell us a little bit about what it is you do and the type of patients that you're really interested in treating?
Well, I live in Canada, especially in Quebec, so I'm French Canadian. I'm a naturopath, so traditional naturopath, or like Dr. Rosenthal will call me, it's a non-D. So I'm a non-doctor naturopathic practitioner. I usually have clients because technically I can't have patients since I'm not a doctor. As naturopathic laws or principle works, we'll always go on improving everything that we can in the natural world, like say food and natural supplement and lifestyle and let's say a bit of psychological and emotional management to help people live out a better life and help ease all the symptoms that they can have.
Right. So what I'm always interested in what got people into their respective fields and their particular interests. So what's your personal story behind that?
Well, I started bodybuilding in like 2006, 2005, 2006. I used to be a bodybuilder when I was like 22, 23 years old. I competed until I was like 28 years old. And at that point, now I'm 38. At that point, I figured out that a lot of the bodybuilding community weren't really taking care of the health of their client. So people were really easily damaged, like poor digestion, poor sleep, anxiety problems. So everything was really bad, but as long as they were in shape, they weren't really caring. I'm like, okay, that's a big problem because after that, they would come and see me. Okay, can you help me get in shape? I'm like, yeah, but I mean, this is not working. So I started working in a health food store. Luckily, the boss over there was really into learning. So I started reading and reading and reading and reading. In 2013, I finished my naturopathic course. In Quebec, it's private school. So I finished my naturopathic course. And now I started just mainly working with people who want to get healthier and better, feel better. So that's what I started working on. I did the FMU, the Functional Medicine University, back in 2013. After that, I just met up with a lot of nice people that we know, a couple of Ryan Sidemark that we know. Yeah. So he's a great guy in functional neurology. I met Dr. Alex Vasquez. If you don't, I think you probably know who Dr. Alex Vasquez is. So I was really lucky to know him, read all these things, did his course. So I just love the way everything integrates together and figure it out. Since I'm a naturopath and I can't really order any tests because technically in Quebec, a naturopath can't order anything that's a blood drawn. Well, I have to do some educated guess most of the time. So I usually try and learn so much. So it's my educated guess is much better and better.
Right. So our main topic of discussion today is going to be insulin resistance and how that affects the brain. Okay. Kind of talk us through who should be, concerned about, whether or not they're insulin resistant, just right off the cuff.
Well, if you look just as easy statistics, I was reading statistics a lot on the insulin resistance by itself because I have a naturopathic school in Quebec. So I'm preparing a course for my students who are usually private trainers or naturopath or nutritionists who want to learn more about the integrative model. So I was reading a lot of integrative research and I found out that close to probably 70-75% of people have a pathological or not healthy degree of insulin resistance. So it's a pretty much severe gap in the population if you see that there's not that much people who are diagnosed with diabetes. So I was like, okay, that's pretty bad. This could be a problem. And in 2017, I was lucky enough to join a group that specialized in insulin on Facebook with Ivor Cummins. Do you know who Ivor Cummins is?
I'm not familiar, no.
It's called the Fat Emperor. His name on Twitter is the Fat Emperor. Him and Gabor Erdosi are two people who are really, really into the insulin resistance and the cholesterol and atherosclerosis. So I started studying with them a lot of their work. And after that, I started talking a lot with them. So it really furthered my perspective a lot. So it was much easier to understand. And I figured out that a lot of the people have many symptoms of insulin resistance without being technically diabetic,
Right.
which is a pretty big problem. So like everybody that mainly comes in your office that doesn't feel that great,
Mm-hmm.
well, you should screen them for this. Why? Because it's an easy test. I mean, it's not it's not nothing invasive. It's nothing exaggerate to check their A1C and their fasting insulin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy. That's what I liked about it. It's easy to test.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay. What so what types of factors do you think that modern society I guess presents to all these people that is really attributing to this increase in insulin resistance that you're seeing in your research and in your office?
well, about everything that we know about modern life,
Yeah.
people don't sleep enough. No, sleep is a pretty huge factor in immunity because insulin resistance and immunity is greatly connected. So
Mm-hmm.
like insulin resistance is like a low-grade systemic inflammation process. So it's so well connected that everything that will disrupt this will have a big impact on insulin sensitivity. So lack of sleep, chronic stress, too much processed food, people altering their diet. A lot of people like to play like low carb, high fat, low carb, like they're mixing diets. And keep in mind that it's always the gut microbiome that has to handle all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And usually part of it that will dictate the response. Well, if you just always alter what you're eating and you're always not following a pattern that you can understand, well, that's a big problem. I mean, not everybody should be keto, not everybody should be paleo, but you can't really mix like, let's say, keto and 2 days a week you eat carbs. No, that won't work. That's not the way it works. So
Yeah.
it's completely different. And most people, well, people eat too much or too much of refined stuff, too much of flour, too much sugar. Usually it's the mix of fat and carbs, which are not a really great idea, especially when the carbs are transformed or heavily processed. So this is a main point. Of course, you can add all the artificial sweeteners in there. You can have the increase of stress, overall stress management, which is a incredible burden in North America. So all of these factors are not helping at all.
Yeah. So what are some neurological signs that we tend to see in the office when you see somebody who has insulin resistance? Or
these are complicated because these are always more like predisposition. They're never like clear-cut causes. So when you read on it, you see that let's say we use just insulin resistance for instance, if you look let's say the correlation between, let's say, an FLD, so hepatic steatosis, which is the hepatic component of metabolic syndrome, and depression, you'll have a 60 to 120% increase of chance of having them together. So this is already a big thing going on there. Of course, it's all inflammatory, and now we know that everything that happens in the brain is related to immunity. A lot of things you'll see, of course, you'll see that there'll be usually lack of control because people have a need to control, but it's an illusion of control. I think we could discuss that in all other topic, but people have an illusion of control. They mainly manage what's happening, but these will probably have a easier time managing emotion, easier time managing a healthy food plan, easier time not going overboard. If they pass in front of a pastry shop and they'll just, okay, it smelled so good, I got in. It felt great. Yeah, and I wanted to cry after. Okay, yeah, that's not really good. So, and you'll see all these little things. You can't really relate them directly to insulin resistance. But when you check what the brain insulin resistance does to the neurotransmitters production, well, you can relate most of them and you can see an improvement over time, which is really nice.
Absolutely. So what are some ways in your office that you are using to intervene with these clients?
Well, it's usually the main point is trying to have them lose weight, of course. So they say that losing 10 pounds is already a really big factor, but in many cases, it will be just to try to implement some stuff that will try and reduce inflammation and reduce also lipopolysaccharides, so LPS, incursion into the systemic circulation to reduce this immune activation. So of course, I'll have them eat on a shorter period of time. I'm not a really big fan of intermittent fasting because most people can't have a real intermittent fasting, but I'll put them on a, let's say, 12-hour on feeding, 12-hour off feeding. If you can do a little bit, let's say 10 or 11, I'll try to do it 10 and 11 if it's possible, because some people have weird work schedules, so they can't really afford to eat in this period for their health, and their mental health won't work that much. I try to have them eat, well, a lot more of fruit and vegetable. Okay. Even if carnivore diet is really on the trend right now, I'm not a fan of it. So I'll try to have my client eat a lot of fruit and vegetables because they will provide nutrients and they provide structure and they'll provide fiber to help the gut work better. I'll try to have them avoid everything that's processed and try to find alternative that will be less detrimental to their intestinal health. So try and find, even if they're cheat meal, because you know the notion of cheat meal, most people will ask you, okay, what can I cheat? Like, well, this quote I took from talking about Alex Vasquez says, okay, how healthy do you think you are? Well, not that much. Well, you shouldn't eat cake then. So, so that's one of my main answer when people ask, when can I cheat? Do you feel great? No. Well, you can't cheat. So that's the big thing. We'll find better options that are not cheap. That you're not obligated to eat pizza or fries to have fun with your diet. One other point that's pretty interesting that I learned over time is a lot of people associate food and emotion. So they'll eat when they don't feel good. They'll eat when they feel good. They eat when they want to feel good. So, okay, that's a big problem. I'll try to have them work on enjoying the moments, not the meal itself. So yeah, a lot of clients I was working on says, I got a promotion, so I went to go and eat. Okay, did you bring some friends? Yes. Can you have the moment being the nice thing and meal not being the nice thing? Oh yeah, I can do that. Well, I'll do that. And order clean food, but take the moment to have the dopamine rush. Because I mean, friends can provide a dopamine rush. I mean, it's like a reward, and being with your friend and having fun is a reward. So the brain will connect in this way.
Right.
Because in most cases, people will associate food with it because food is a pretty big trigger in this reward process in the brain. So you're trying to implement all of these.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking to the dopamine aspect of food, I mean, so much of our food and especially the processed food is, engineered to really manipulate this pathway, right? And it's really hard for people to get out of this cycle, right?
It's hard because if you check, I'll send you a research after. I'll have it on my computer. It made it in a journal Cell. I like the journal because they always make nice graphic to to show people, so I could put them in my presentation. They show that if you eat fat, you have a nice dopamine response because it's a lot of calories. If you eat sugar, you have a nice dopamine response. If you mix fat and sugar, you have more than twice the effect. Because the mix of fat and sugar, let's say like a muffin or a cake or anything like a chocolate bar, will have always a pretty good amount of fat, pretty good amount of sugar, is more than double the effect in terms of dopamine rush. So this is a big problem because people are getting used to the high dopamine rush associated with that fast food, but at the same time, the brain can desensitize its dopamine axis when there's too much, because the brain never wants too much of a neurotransmitter. It works. You work in functional neurology. If you give too much of something, the brain will downregulate the receptor. If you don't give enough, it'll try to upregulate. It's not as good as downregulating, but it still can try and upregulate for a certain amount of time. But in terms of dopamine, it has been proven it'll try and keep it better.
Right. And so, I mean, what we're basically looking at is like an addiction, right? So one of the ways you mentioned that you're able to kind of substitute that dopamine that's received from the processed unhealthy food is eating with friends. What are some other ways that you kind of help wean clients off of these addictive foods, and how do you really curb that?
Well, I was there in naturopathic principles, and in naturopathic school, you always implement like healthy lifestyle. So all of these normal healthy lifestyle will help the brain work better. If you work, let's say omega-3s, just omega-3s, you know that omega-3s are in one of the endpoint metabolism in omega-3s in the endocannabinoid system.
Mm-hmm.
So these are known to help. These are known to help into, let's say, what we call fear management, so fear reinstatement. So they have a direct implication with dopamine issues. Magnesium and zinc are a pretty big component in this, because I mean, magnesium and zinc will help with neurotransmitter action in the brain. If you're a big fan of magnesium threonate, well, threonate will help even a bit more, because threonate is a bit of an action that's a bit more anti-inflammatory for the brain compared to other magnesium form. You'll have an increase in protein. If you read on protein intake, you probably do a bit of diet counseling in your office. If you check what the people eat, usually when they come to see you, you'll see that their protein intake is usually pretty low. So far, I estimated that unless the people was in the fitness industry or let's say a big sport, usually they have a protein intake that is roughly 10 to 15% of their calories, which is pretty low. Okay, that's what's recommended by the food counseling in Canada and probably in the US, but it's too low. If you check studies on this I just found out this year, this study, they tested it. If you just increase it to 20-25%, which is not that high of a protein intake, 20-25%, you'll have a better dopamine response, especially if you put them in the morning. So this is easy. Most people don't eat breakfast with protein in them. Well, just protein in breakfast. Mm-hmm. So this will help, and it's an easy step you can recommend to everybody. Try it and it'll work. Put some protein in a breakfast, it'll help with craving. Is it related only to dopamine and insulin sensitivity? No, it's not. It's a big pattern of incretin and leptin resistance and whatever you want to check for it, but it works. So it's a basic step you can do with it.
So could you give us maybe a good example of maybe your ideal breakfast to really get someone through the day and help regulate blood sugar throughout the day? And
well, one of the best breakfasts, you know who Charles Poliquin is?
I don't.
No, Charles Poliquin he's dead now, so no, but he used to be one of the most known trainer in the world, and he was a really big proponent of the meat and nut breakfast. Mm-hmm. So you only eat meat, nut, and vegetable. Okay, that's pretty inconvenient for you. Say you're on call, you're at Nicole. So let's say you just go with an easier version of this. You can have eggs, omelet. Of course, if you go on the high fat version, well, you can let go of any starchy carbs because you'll have enough calories in there. If you go with a lean protein source, let's say people don't have any problem with eating a buffalo steak in the morning, because most men won't have any problem with eating meat for breakfast. So you can have them have a bit of meat, a bit of veggie, and usually a big amount of fruit in there. So usually it's just to keep balance into the insulin release. Of course, if you have an athlete, you can increase the carb intake, but always be wary that a lot of carbs in the morning, you have to be careful of how do people slept before that. Because if their sleep was impaired, they'll have an impaired cortisol and insulin response in the morning. So of course you don't want to trigger insulin that much in the morning if the sleep wasn't that great, or if the person is a high stress person, because this you can evaluate pretty easy when you take the intake form. I mean, I've seen most of you practitioners in the US have an intake form that's like 12-page long. So if you don't know after that, a hint of stress level of your client, either you can't read or your client's not answering properly. So this is pretty easy to guess. So if your client is high stress, well, of course, carbs in the morning is not your best point, your best choice. If they're low stress and they have a high amount of energy to spend in a day, of course, you can increase carb in the morning. But your main focus will have to put a pretty decent amount of protein in there, usually related to muscular mass. So it's muscle mass. This is pretty easy to calculate. If you check latest studies by, or review of studies by Aragon and Schofield, they put the protein intake it was in kilo, because most people work in kilo in the world. It's just the United States doesn't work in kilo. But it was about around 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of protein.
Mm-hmm.
So it's per day. So this is a per day thing. So if you divide it in a meal, well, you can get a pretty decent amount of protein in a meal.
Mm-hmm. Of course. So if I'm a patient, or if I'm a client, if I'm, somebody who's worried about possibly being insulin resistant, what are some signs and symptoms that I might want to look out for that might trigger me to think, okay, maybe I need to get this maybe looked at, or seen by a professional like yourself?
Well, central obesity is a big thing. When you
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of fat around the stomach area, that's a big problem. So it's usually related with insulin resistance. We can relate it to any, like say, cardiovascular disease. It's not a perfect match, but it could still be one. The inability to go without eating. So people who can't go without eating, to get angry, what the angry with an H, so they get angry between meals. If they don't snack all the time, that's a pretty good sign of metabolic inflexibility. Because I mean, the end point is not being, let's say, I was talking with other people who do keto. So I don't have any problem with people who do keto diet when they understand the problem they are trying to solve. And they're not trying to eat keto brownies all the time. So the big problem is you want to get metabolically flexible so your body can alternate fuel easily, because that's the way the body works properly. If you know Peter Attia, the doctor Peter Attia, you can follow. He's a really great guy into let's say metabolic hacking, and he's a real MD. So he doesn't talk nonsense usually. So it's pretty nice. You can follow him on this. He's on Twitter and everything. He's metabolic flexibility. He's being able to eat carbs, use all the carbs, and after that, just switch back to fat. I mean, you're not stuck between everything. But it's pretty a good point. Not being able to not eat, which is one of the best points you can ask. People who are always snacking, either they're too stressed, or either they have a really big inability to use their own fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a big problem.
Very good. So we are just about out of time, but I wanted to make sure that we had enough time budgeted at the end for you to give us any final thoughts or any final points that you wanted to bring up for me and the audience today.
Well, easy points for all the practitioners out there. If you check insulin resistance, the real marker starts around 5.7 in A1C. Mm-hmm. So 5.7 or 5.4 to 5.7 should be your cutoff mark in A1C. You could use fasting insulin also to check for that. I don't remember the measure. Your measures as double digit, if I remember well, in the United States for fasting insulin. Usually I think it's around 40. That gets to be a bit more problematic. So usually 40 to 45 is okay. Above that, you get a bit too much of fasting insulin. Another thing you can check for, which is a pretty good sign of insulin resistance, is triglycerides. When they get a bit too high, or you can see the progression on the labs. Because even if I can't order labs, my client just bring me the labs. So there's doctors, so they bring me the lab from the doctors. If you check, let's say, the 6 years lab, and you see that the triglycerides are always ramping up, I mean, that's a problem. This could be used as a big problem. If you don't have access to all these labs, you can check online for something that's called the Fatty Liver Index Calculator, which is really great. It was developed in Italy. It's to calculate the chance of having a fatty liver, which is good because, I mean, the liver enzyme ALT and AST are not good at this. So, and you can't always have an echography, sonar, I don't know what you call it in English, but an echo.
Echo.
Yeah, an echo, like for the pregnant woman, but you can have that on liver. That's a good way to see a fatty liver. But fatty liver and insulin resistance go hand to hand. So this is a good, because you could easily check. So everything for the practitioner, always be wary about this. People who are depressed, people who have, well, depression is greatly related to insulin resistance because of the systemic inflammation that both of them share. So which is really, really nice to read on it. If you can go and read on PubMed or any journal, you'll see a lot of paper talking about both of the situation. So the best thing you can try and work, let's say you're just in the audience, you're not a practitioner, just try to eat in a shorter window of time. Try to eat in, say, the 12-hour window of time. Let's say you eat breakfast at 7, eat no later than 7. But try to eat a reasonable amount of calories. Of course, if you don't eat a lot of calories and you spend a lot, well, your body will experience craving. That's normal. Your body can trigger response without knowing what the real need is, but the only thing you can do is create a craving, eat something. Well, that's normal. You'll see that a lot with people trying to lose weight and they're cut their calories to like 600-700, and they have severe food craving. Of course, 700 calories. I mean, a big dog probably burns calories and you weigh twice the amount of weight. So you'll need more calorie to burn. So your body will try and tell you, well, eat something and make sure to eat nutrient-dense food. If you can't, get good supplements. Add some supplements. Omega-3s and magnesium will be your best friend in these kind of situation, and they'll both help with insulin sensitivity.
Very good. Very good. And lastly, you're up in Quebec, Canada, correct?
Yep.
So how would people get in touch with you and your office? What's the best way for them to learn more about you?
Usually the best way to get through me is through my Facebook page. So Matthew Bouchard, ND, because in Quebec I can use the letters, which is pretty hard for my US friends, but I mean, I could use the letters because there are no doctors in Quebec. So Matthew Bouchard, ND, it's the best way to get to talk with me. I share a lot of things. They're always in French, but the Google Translate works pretty nice now on Facebook, so you could probably read them easily.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you again for coming on and sharing on this topic. We have not had anyone touch on this yet. So I was very pleased when this was the topic you wanted to talk about. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of good information out of this, because obviously this is such a big problem in the US and Canada as well, I'm assuming. So, so thank you for sharing on this topic.
Well, thanks again for inviting me. It was great. Thank you very much.
Of course. Well, stay safe up there. And this has been your host, Dr. Joe. Be well.